Hello everyone, here we are on page 293 discussing writing to persuade as a continuation of the chapter that we have already started. Earlier this week, or maybe last week, we have discussed the idea of how using logic helps to persuade your audience. Of course, we already know through our studies for the SAT essays that employing logic alone won't suffice, but rather we have also to note two other appeals that we need to pay attention to, and they are emotions as well as ethical beliefs. Reason alone is not just quite as effective. Many people can be approached through other let's say means or through other appeals. Like for example, if we go for emotions, and this is what many people use through media advertisement and such issues. Like for example, when you watch a video that has to do with let's say baby care or donations and so on, you will notice that many people will try to manipulate the idea of emotions. On the other hand, also ethical beliefs, the concept of credibility is often also played. Now, if we take a look at the following chart that we have in front of us, we will notice that the chart is in fact it selects some words used by Thomas Jefferson as he's trying to appeal to his to the colonists in order to in writing, in fact, the Declaration of Independence. Now, look at the first group that we have over here, which is called the emotional words towards Britain. Notice the words used, okay? Injuries, usurpations, absolute tyranny, refused, mock trial, murder, imposing, depriving, and oppression. You will notice that all these words are in fact negative. They present an idea of something to be afraid of, something to be like causing pain, causing injuries, tyranny. People will be scared, frightened out of these. So, in fact, these words do somewhat employ the idea of scaring the colonies or the uh, the people around them, the listeners, the audience, towards his point. And now, if you look at the way he describes, the colonies, and you will notice that the words wholesome, public good, humble, free people, as well as rectitude. Now, we will notice that Jefferson has made a great use of the appeal to emotions. In another word, appeal to emotions is also called pathos. I think we've already discussed this in the classroom whenever we were studying the SAT essay writing. Yet, to add more to this, you will notice that at the bottom of the page we have this paragraph. This paragraph is taken from the actual Declaration of Independence. In fact, some of these lines also are familiar to us as we have studied them in William Lloyd Garrison's what do you call it? The the prospectus that he's written. We've studied it earlier last semester. Of course, now notice the usage of the words. We hold these truths. It's a truth. It's something that is credible, that we cannot argue with, okay, that all men are created equal, the same thing as well, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, guys, notice these words. These words are inseparable rights for the people. They are given these rights by their creator, and hence they are equal. This is something that nobody dares to argue with. Now, of course, employing logic alone is not always sufficient, while on the other hand, supporting your logical appeal with emotions and ethical beliefs help you establish a foundation of understanding between you and your audience. And this is why we are asking you guys to try to employ at least two of these appeals. Yet, appealing to emotions and ethics and so on is not always enough, because on page 295 we will notice that these are the backgrounds of your development of the essay. These are the supporting points, yet at the same time there are other issues that we need to pay attention to. Remember that this lesson targets the idea of how to pre-write, how to prepare. Now remember, in order to prepare, you have to pre-write, to establish a foundation for your writing. You need to pay attention to three major elements that will be discussed later on. They are the purpose, the subject that you need to discuss, and the thesis statement. Now, of course, it has already been established that the thesis statement is the key element in your writing, okay, because it announces everything you need to talk about. Now, of course, we will discuss this later on, but first we need to start with the purpose. Of course, what's your purpose of writing a persuasive essay? Simple. You need to convince people of your point of view. You need to get them to understand where you come from, for example, your perspective, your idea. So hence, when we are writing, we have to have a certain insight, and we have to be clear, logical in our arguments. We have to have the appropriate appeals. Remember that this would present the gateway to understanding or to knowing where you guys come from. Now, on the other hand, I have choosing a subject. Choosing a subject is quite one of the most critical issues anybody can talk about. In fact, when upon selecting a subject, many people fail, not only because, or not just because they don't know what to write about, but they do not find the proper connection, the keys into understanding this aspect or this topic. Now, you have to choose only ones or topics that stir emotions, that help readers identify with you. Arguable propositions are important to consider at this point, as they have that effect. Make sure you are aware of controversial issues all around you. Just consider the idea as if, like, what do I believe? Where do I stand on this topic? And is this topic a proper topic to discuss with my audience or not? So, in fact, choosing a subject is very important, a proper subject. Now, look at the chart that you have to deal with down there. Choose an issue that has at least two sides. Remember, all of our concepts or the ideas that we want to bring forward, sometimes they are very, very single-sided. On the other hand, having an arguable proposition would quite help you in having two sides. Now, after this, choose an issue that you feel strongly about. Okay, sometimes we write about topics that we don't quite like stand for or we don't quite believe in, but knowing more about a subject could help you a lot in addressing that subject. Okay? Choose an issue for which there is an audience whose belief or behavior you would like to influence. Again, always in persuasive writing, you have to understand the background, the people around you, because these are the people that you need to address. Choose an issue that has a position you can support with facts, examples, and reasons. Remember, it's essential to know what you want to write about, as well as it's always essential to know the track that you want to take to address that, in which we call the purpose. So understanding our purpose, understanding of choosing how we choose the topic are extremely important. Yet if we move on, we see the fact of developing a clear thesis statement. Now, we've already established earlier this year is that the, the thesis statement has to be narrow and broad at the same time. If we may say somewhere in between, it shouldn't be too narrow that you can't quite discuss it, and at the same time, it shouldn't be too broad that it governs a lot of information that we shouldn't be discussing, or we won't have enough time and area to discuss. So hence, what are the key things that I need to watch out for the actual thesis statement? In fact, if I want to start choosing my thesis statement, I have to keep away from two aspects. The first aspect is, in fact, the fact. I'm sorry for this. This looked awkward. Okay, so in fact, facts. Facts are too narrow. You can't quite just support them. In some areas, wolves are near extinction. Yeah, so what should we do? Should we just go to this area and support and help support them, maintain them? I don't know. But look at the second one. There is a preference. Okay? All right, now look at this. I am horrified by the killing of wolves. Wow. Yes. Who isn't? In fact, many people are not horrified. In fact, they believe that we should get rid of the wolves. Now, of course, some people are going to jump now. I know how it is. They're going to go like, oh, what about the cycle of life and so on? I'm not talking about that at the moment. All right. But look at this now. A proper thesis should be narrow enough to collect a certain aspect of an issue that we can discuss later on. Laws protecting wolves must be strengthened. So notice he's talking about the idea of protecting wolves, and that the laws that protect the wolves should be strengthened. Of course, now, how will they be strengthened? This should be discussed in your essay. All right? So I'm going to go for, let's say, strengthened with A, for example, having, let's say, uh, providing a certain season for hunting these wolves. Number, the letter B, for example, would issue, let's say, uh, laws of protection by the government, that so on, so on. So you have to develop the topic, or to look for a thesis that you can develop the topic in at least three ways, guys, because the moment that you have three ways, a three-way discussion, that means you will be able to present us with three different paragraphs in the body later on. So after you write the thesis, now try to ask yourself, okay, can you state the thesis in simple one sentence? You don't really need to develop it in more than one sentence. Is the statement either a judgment or a recommendation rather than a fact or a preference? Now remember that having a fact and having a preference are always wrong. How do I replace them? Is it a judgment about something, or a recommendation like the previous question that we had over here? Okay, I recommend things. Keep asking yourself, what are the ways to do so? Like, can you develop it? So, is the point of view debatable as you have expressed it? Can you think of any opposing arguments? is the thesis statement based on logical reasons? Now, so up to here, we already know that our thesis should be none of the following: a fact or a preference, because these are either too broad or like too specific. I can't quite argue them. While on the other hand, okay, if I would want to place them, I have to check on a judgment, use a judgment, or maybe a recommendation. Okay, and remember that it should be debatable, as well as that the thesis statement should be based on logical reasons. Now, this is so far for page 296. The following topic is going to be of great essence for us, especially for the writers. So, which is something that many of us fail to do. The following topic is, in fact, knowing our audience. Before we write, we have to understand, who are we writing to? Who are they? What do they stand for? You got it? And selecting our language is, or our diction that we use, or even the topic itself, could be of great essence for us. Okay, you don't want to be discussing, like, for example, euthanasia with grade 4 students, or for example, you want to be discussing, uh, let's say, uh, the negative effects of war with the military personnel, because these people are quite involved in this issue, and their perspective would be like one single-sided biased. So anyway, what we need to do is that we need to select our audience and select our diction and language and the way that we will appeal or use the appeals for these issues in the topic carefully. So again, choosing a subject is essential, yet it may fall short if you don't know your audience. It would be just futile to argue sometimes or something where everyone around you holds the same belief as yours. Like, you have the common ground already, so what are you arguing about? People might be bored with whatever you're saying, they don't care. But if the audience has a different position on the topic, that would be great, because they will be listening and looking for the things you want to say. Okay? Now, of course, also the diction and the language used is very important, as well as the level of formality. Now, if we look at the table that we have over there, which is the one about the audience. I'm sorry for this. The audience worksheet. Now, many of us, like, we have always asked our students to pay attention to their audience. But how do I select my audience? How do I know that this topic can work and this approach can work? Well, simple, guys. Just look at this. Okay. First of all, you have to draw a spectrum of your the positions that you have over there on a topic. For example, let's say I'm going to use this color. Okay, I have two extremities. For example, if I'm talking about wearing a uniform to school, or having free code, dress code, or so on. So that is either to conform with the rest, or to be more like free to do whatever you want. Okay, to wear whatever you want. Now, I need you also now to look at the audience. Where would they fall? Will they want to have freedom of choosing whatever they want to wear, or will they be wanting to stay or stick to the school rules and to the school uniform? Or maybe they could be somewhere in between. So after you do that, after you draw the spectrum and you see where your audience falls, you have to go to the third step, which is understanding their position. Now, wherever they are going to fall, now you have to think, or you have to fill their own shoes. You have to understand, why do you think they what they like that. Why do you think? For example, I believe that students would love to stick to the idea of free dress code for everybody because they get to express themselves. Okay, so I understand that this is their reason. Okay, now what about their emotions? Okay, so if I wear the students, okay, will that fit only? Would that be the only reason? Okay, it's a display of, let's say, a fashion statement or so on, or some people go for an identity. Okay, and I should also understand their the higher principles that guide their lives, which is in fact the idea of freedom of choice or whatsoever, and so on. Now, remember that I need to address all of these later on. So how do I address them? This is number 4. Okay, how do I address their position? First of all, I have to appeal to the reason. Okay, because what are the flaws in thinking that wearing a uniform or not wearing a uniform to school? What are the let's say the faults in that? And then I go like, I have to address also their emotions when it comes to this. Okay, and the concept of freedom that they are addressing over there in their ethical beliefs or credibility. Being a student, I need to be free. I shouldn't be in prison. Now, imprisoned with the choice of the school, blah, 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 whatever they say. Now, of course, you have for a moment, you have to stand. This is very important to take some time and at least concede one point. Okay? By conceding a point, I should identify one point of disagreement that the audience have against me, and I have to accept that point, but at the same time, I have to counter it. Okay? Countering that would help fortify your position in answering what these people have. The moment that you have the answer or the answer back for all of these aspects, you will be building a heavily fortified belief or let's say discussion, an argument that no one dares to defy. Now, I need you to remember that everything over here should be used upon writing your uh, assignment, which is going to appear later on our dashboard. So far, in order to sum up everything so far, we have discussed the purpose, we have discussed the audience, we've also discussed the thesis statement, and of course now we are going to move to the way that we are going to develop an argument. In the development, we should be talking about the organization, or in other words, anything that helps in portraying uh, the way, the let's say the track, the road to which you lead, excuse me, you lead your audience towards the topic. Now, you have to understand that if you want to convince people, there are two ways, or in fact, it's only one, okay? One way to portray your essay, which is, in fact, the, I'm sorry for this, it is the how presenting your ideas. How do you support your idea? How do you get support for this idea? Okay, all the evidence that you should collect should, number one, should be supporting your claim, should be relevant to your claim. Of course, we will be talking about this in the evaluation of the evidence later on. So, in fact, you should be able to collect many of these ideas from different newspapers, magazines, books, YouTube, anything you want, and at the same time, also you should be anticipating what the other people will have. You should, and as we said earlier, that when the moment that you concede a point, what happens? You have to counter argue it in order to make your idea, let's say, uh, uh, strong enough for the others to abide by it. Now, if you look at the guidelines over there, these are very important. You have to, number one, list all positions that you're in your rewriting, in your pre-writing notes, and be prepared to represent them honestly and accurately and address the opposing views. To support your opinion, use facts, refer to well-respected experts, again, for the idea of credibility. If the opposing view has a good point, remember to accept it, concede it, and maybe try to address it. If you can't, it also presents that you have, let's say, studied every aspect for the topic that is being discussed. Use logical reasons, both deductive and inductive reasoning if you can, and try to use support from the language that you use, as well as the level of formality, by understanding who your audience is. Now, how do I evaluate the evidence that I collect from these newspapers and let's say YouTube and so on? Many of these are fake, and the concept of fake news is all over the place. Now, in order to know how important or how strong my evidence is, I have to evaluate my evidence according to the following criteria. Number one, it has to be relevant and up to date. Number two, it has to be reliable. The sources have to be reliable as well as the objectivity. Now, it's very important to pay attention now to the table that you have in the middle of the page, which shows you how to evaluate your evidence. Here, I'm going to go back to the blue color. Okay, so notice that the first evidence, polls show that 17-year-olds are as knowledgeable as 18-year-olds. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't refer to the topic here. The topic talks about that allowing 17-year-olds to vote in the primary elections. Now, of course, if you look at it like the first thing asks you that polls show that 17-year-olds are as knowledgeable as 18-year-olds. Now, is there a problem with this idea? Well, let's think about it. It does support the thesis, yet it explains logical reason to extend vote to 17-year-olds. Now, this is good, right? Okay. Why? Because it did discuss the 17-year-olds as well as the 18-year-olds. So it gives me, number one, the polls, they are studies, okay? They show that the 17-year-olds who took part in it are all as knowledgeable as the 18-year-olds. It does that. It is, most probably he's talking about like recent polls, all right? If they are, let's say, governmental polls or from like good sources, I could say that the evidence is reliable as well as they are objective. Now let's look at the second one. Does it support the thesis? Let's see. A low percentage of 18-year-olds turn out to vote. Now, how does this help me in, remember, I want the law to allow 17-year-olds to vote. So what if the 18-year-olds do not vote? Does that mean 17-year-olds will? So it doesn't quite support the thesis. It focuses mainly on the 18-year-olds. It doesn't tell anything about 17-year-olds. So I'm going to move to the third one, which is 17-year-olds claim that such a law will encourage civic awareness. Okay, now, yes, it does talk about 17-year-olds and the law, which will help them have a greater part in choosing who to represent them in the primary elections. Yet, there is a tiny little problem. Okay, it is only biased towards the objective. That means it's 100% saying that, okay, only 17-year-olds will be encouraged. What about the rest? What about 18-year-olds? They both are part of this. Okay, both 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds should or will be encouraged through their civic awareness. Now, as you see, you have to evaluate your evidence according to its validity, reliability, and relevance to the relevance of the primary and secondary sources. Just a reminder that primary sources are the direct sources that you have. Secondary sources, they are the reporting sources that you have. Of course, you guys in the writing, you have to look for proper evidence for your claims and supports, especially that now you are going to do it online. So be sure that we will be checking over your sources. The last part that I have in front of me is the organization of my argument. Remember that organization, for every type of writing, you have an organization. For the narrative, I have the, what do you call it? The, I'm sorry for this. So for the writing, I'm sorry again. Okay, so for the narrative, I have the sequential order, or maybe the logical order. Not logical, I'm sorry. The chronological order. On the other hand, I have for the writing the spatial order. For the persuasive essay, I have the logical order. Okay, and it usually depends on two aspects. Okay, you could either have it in a problem solution pattern where you get to provide a problem, tell about a problem, and then you have to present its solution. Okay, and on the other hand, if it's you can use the compare and contrast, let's say, pattern, in which if you have let's say two clashing views, and you have to present them properly. Now, of course, in order to follow up with this, okay, guys, the table down there over here is very important. This is very important. We have noticed that many students do not use enough transitions. We call these transitions for concession or contrast, in which they either contrast the ideas or they, let's say, augment that point. In conclusion, writing a persuasive essay is not, or does not depend mainly on being logical. You have to also address other appeals. You have to pay attention to who your audience is, to the voice you use, to the words you use, because you need to know your audience. And at the end, as well as the thesis statement, which announces your topic. And at the end, we have the organization of your argument. Remember that you should test your evidence that you're going to use, and as well as having a proper, let's say, path into explaining your topics. I bid you well, and I hope that you have all of your questions answered in this short explanation, and we will see you soon.